This is Third Paradigm, and I'm Teresa Coraggio and my magnificent peony. It used to be that I bought flowers and they died within a week. Now, thanks to this video blog, they live forever. In my last episode, I did my one-year retrospective, which was very content dense. In my Substack version, I think I had about 100 links. So today, I'm going to be speaking from the heart and not really be using notes and looking at how it is that we can reverse the Great Reset. I think that this is a disease that's going to have to express itself, and it's not there yet, but it will be, and that's coming fast. And so having our own perspective on how do we approach this and what should our response be, I think it requires a deepening of our spiritual understanding. And for that, I'm going to be looking at A Course in Miracles, something I've studied for almost 20 years. And I'm again on the end of the course portion of that. So that's about 670 pages. And then I want to look at David Graeber and David Wengrow's The Dawn of Everything and look at what that has to tell us that might give us some hope. And I also want to look at Putin's talk to St. Petersburg, which was quoted by the great Kanikoa, as he goes by in his video blog, and look at what that says about what's coming, and then end by looking at some things from applying my How to Dismantle an Empire and imagining how this could turn out better for all of us. Let's get started. From my observation, the repercussions of the Great Reset are starting to be evident. I know two people in my own circles who have collapsed, healthy young people in their 30s, athletic, for no apparent reason. And it's been a hard thing to try to tell anyone that they should consult with people who are dealing with adverse effects of the vaccine because there's such a resistance to being able to hear that. I think that for those of us who have been on this side for a while, there's maybe a part of us that wants to be vindicated, that wants to say, hey, we tried to tell you, and you wouldn't listen. And I think that we need to be coming from a place of understanding the level of fear that people are dealing with, that there is such a guilt and shame and horror of people believing that they could have taken something into their body that may have altered their lives forever. And even worse, may have done that to their children. So I think this is going to require vast levels of compassion on our part and the recognition that we would have done the same thing in their position, that each of us is that person. That person is taking on this journey for all of us. And we need to have a purpose to that journey, but we also need to recognize that these are people who are going to need us because they are getting shut down on the one side, and if they are rejected from the other, that is just going to leave them isolated on top of dealing with all of these tragic consequences. On Charles Eisenstein's Substack, I responded to a commenter who had posted about, as she called her, her beautiful bodhisattva daughter, a woman who had gone to Ivy League colleges and graduate school despite their advice to the contrary, who had brought dental care to impoverished villages in Nicaragua, who had studied in India, who was looking to try to combine integrative medicine with Western medicine. And at the end of her first year of medical school, she had the second shot and had a massive stroke. And for the last year and a half has been her family's beloved, exhausting project. And that has been a really humbling thing. The mom writes with so much feeling and understanding and compassion. I couldn't really say anything that would give her hope other than looking at there being meaning at the end of this, that this is not something that is just happening, that this is a journey that she's taking on for all of us because it's going to, I believe, bring us to a better place. And the mom's gracious response back to me was that knowing that other people cared made the unbearable bearable. I think this is the message that we need to be bringing. So when I look at A Course in Miracles, how does that apply? The premise of A Course in Miracles is that what we are in now is a dream, that reality exists outside of this dream, but we, being one mind, are having a collective nightmare, a nightmare that we put ourselves into out of guilt and fear and shame, and that we can change that dream, and by making it into a good dream, we become unafraid of waking up. I think that people who are not wanting to hear what's really happening are dealing with two contradictory levels of thinking about that. That's more of a superstition. That I think there's a superstition that our thoughts can make things happen. But at the same time, there's this belief that we're subject to the laws of the world, that the world can make us suffer, can make us have loss. And so those two things are contradictory. That if this is a dream and we control this dream, we can't be subject to it. It doesn't control us. And it means that everything can be changed as easily as we can change our mind. And that's not an easy thing to do, but our ability to learn is what the Course is talking about, is amazing because we've taught ourselves that we're not who we really are. We've taught ourselves this elaborate set of rules that we subject ourselves to, and that seeing what's obvious and in front of our face is so much easier than understanding the things that we've tried to teach ourselves. In this world that is our dream, we have only one job, and that job is forgiveness. And I think that's going to be a role that really comes into its own during this next phase. If we can listen not to the superficial of what people are saying, but instead to that deep cry for help, that desire that things not be the way that they seem to be, that's in everyone. And I think that the more harshly someone pushes back against any form of hope is the more that they can't let themselves have it because they just can't believe it's true. It's up to you to bring this. And the way that you do it is to convince yourself. There's no one else's experience that can convince you. So open up in your own life to what happens. What's the outcome when you let go of your judgment of other people and let your experience tell you what's real? According to my reading in the Course this morning, the outcome is a world that is lit with hope and sparkles with a gentle friendliness, and that has soft invitation from all things to be your friend and to join with you. So how do we get to that world in this dream that sparkles with a gentle friendliness? I think we do that by going small, by creating what my viewer Maria calls micro communities. And I think also that history is being written backwards, that we're discovering or inventing history and anthropology at the point where we're ready for that. That's really the theme of The Dawn of Everything, David Graeber's final book. In it, what he talks about is that small communities and anarchist societies have existed for millennia, that's really the given for how things were, that the anomalies have been empires and these structures where people are subordinate. In this, he says that comparing different societies, that what made some societies really immune to being conquered is that there wasn't a central government in terms of all the institutions to be able to give up power. That sometimes there was a figurehead, but that figurehead didn't have the standing military, didn't have control of the food system, didn't have an economy that made it where whatever orders they gave were obeyed. That instead, when someone tried to conquer them, they'd have to go here and here and here and here. And by that time, this one over here would be rebelling. So it protects us to be able to be balkanized. Johann Galtung talks about that in terms of Switzerland and Afghanistan, that has what's made them so resilient is that they have been small cantons that you can't conquer because there's no one to give them up. How does that apply to us? That brings me to Putin's address in St. Petersburg, which I haven't finished because it's very long, but it's brilliant. It's brilliant both in terms of its analysis of how the US and the EU are essentially shooting themselves in the foot by the sanctions that they imposed, which are then coming back on them, and how they've affected inflation and the prices of food and gas and housing, and how this is creating this crisis that he regrets but cannot do anything about. And then he talks about Russia and how he has these specific platforms and these different things that they've put into place in terms of deferring insurances for businesses and controlling the subsidized mortgage rate and encouraging more flourishing of businesses and of home ownership. So production is something that he is looking carefully at and is also bringing inflation down. I don't know whether Sergei Glazyev, his economic advisor, has had a part in this talk, but I suspect so because it's very well thought out. All of the practical, logical things that you would do if you wanted your people to thrive are written into this. It's not an abstraction. And the contrast between us in the US, who are following someone who can't read from a teleprompter, that's only the symptom. But the deep disease is something that Putin talks about, where he says in Europe, it seems like the leaders are not their own masters because they're doing things that are against their own people, that are against businesses, and that they're answering to someone else. That reassured me that Putin and this whole Ukrainian misadventure on the part of the US and NATO is not a part of the Great Reset, that these are things that are operating at odds, but also converging on the Western world and the Crown colonies in a way that is going to change things. I'd like to end with a vision for how things could be from my book, How to Dismantle an Empire. In it, I talk about how mortgages are created by the bankers, which means that they own all the properties for free and that they own our labor also because of that. If you look at housing as the intergenerational transfer of wealth, it isn't something that should just be given away. It can't be given away, not if we want to continue being productive. And so I use it to back a local currency that I call the carrot. Now, I do something very similar to what Sergei Glazyev is talking about, except I do it at a micro community level. I institute protectionist policies so that, for instance, you can take all your properties and all your rents and price them in carrots. But if someone wants to come in with dollars, like these hedge funds, they're going to have to pay 2 to 1 to be able to buy or rent that same property. So all your local business owners and all the people who work in your community have a 2 to 1 advantage. And then in terms of protecting consumers, if you have someone who wants to compete with buying a product from Costco, then they're going to have to transfer their carrots back into dollars, but they're only going to get 1 for every 2 carrots. So in that way, you don't have extractive wealth going out. If you have a hedge fund that's going to sell a house, then that house is only going to be worth half as much. It's only half of that value that's going to go to them. So that's going to create an incentive for all of the speculative investors to get out while they can. And we can use eminent domain in the US. I don't know if this is similar elsewhere, but we can use that to be able to say, we're going to buy these back. Or we can just start at a low interest rate, start at 3%, but let people know that every quarter it's going to go up by 0.1 until it reaches 5%. So what that lets people know is that the cost of your housing is going to be coming down. So if they want to get out while the getting's good, they need to sell now, and people who actually live there can buy. I also live in a college town where 18,000 students are in our city, which is already overwhelmed in terms of having housing. So I think that for maybe 5 years, we should have everyone stay home. Stay home and make the place where you are into a place that other people want to come visit and want to be part of. So I think that education is actually wasted on the youth. I think that it should be a lifelong endeavor. And my vision for our universities is that they're places where all of us travel and live for 3 months at a time and can visit somewhere that has a specialty that we share a passion about, that we also make the places that we live into something that has that attraction, that looks at what it is that we have to teach, so that rather than being something that only the rich can afford, especially if you're coming from a long way away, it becomes something where you need to be qualified, not with money, but with skills. That young people, before they leave home, I think, should develop some skill that will make them an attraction to the place where they want to live. Because I want to be able to interview and to get students here who are going to be an asset to our community. I'll end by looking at healthcare. The model I love is based on Cuba, where education is free for anyone who qualifies and does the work and who agrees that they will provide services to a community in need. Now, I think all of our communities are in need. So what I do is look at a maximum wage. I don't think a minimum wage matters. But I think that if you have a maximum wage, that it's like popcorn. It hits the lid and then falls back down. And you don't have competition for how much debt we can go into over housing. Right now, we bid against each other. So no matter how much you make, it's never enough. So that would give us a way of having every neighborhood having your healthcare advocate, someone who's on your side, someone who you can trust, who you can take responsibility for your own health, but know that there are people who are there and who are not being motivated by pharmaceutical companies or by salaries or bribes or academic pressure. People who are just looking out for you. If you'd like to join me in envisioning what could be possible, here's a video on Build a New Model, and here's a playlist on restoring local sovereignty. Thank you, and I so appreciate you being part of my community on YouTube and on Substack.